It's Dr. Yu. Welcome to the How to Write a Good Resume lecture series. You're not going to be able to get a job unless you have a resume. I think we all know that now. We always start off as a piece of paper when we apply for jobs online, and then we become an entry on a database as a part of the ATS system, and then only when we pass that part do we get to become a human being and get to interview and potentially get the job. So in this lecture series, you're going to learn how to write a good resume. If you don't have a good resume, you're not going to be able to get those interviews that you really want, to get the job that you really want. So let's get to it. First, let me just tell you a little bit about myself with resume writing. So I was a nationally certified resume writer with the National Resume Writers Association for a couple of years. So I went through a lot of testing and hazing, but it was good hazing to become a really good writer. I had a mentor, and then I did professional resume writing for a while. I also worked at a career center for a year at a nonprofit called the Full Employment Council, where I helped over like 300 or 400 job seekers get jobs, with especially people who were long-term unemployed. So usually that's defined as 9 months to a year having no job. And then, of course, I had my own consulting business. It was called Daniel Alexander Career Communications for 5 years, where I also was a professional resume writer and interview coach. So I've done this a lot. I've worked with a lot of people in different industries. I've worked with new college graduates all the way to people who 30 plus years experience. I've worked with executive clients, and I still do in interview coaching and networking. But I still find resumes really fascinating, even though I don't do it professionally anymore. And they're very necessary, and there's so much art and science that goes into resume writing that it's still a really big field. And even this lecture series isn't going to cover everything, but at least it's going to give you the basics. So in this segment, this part one, what we're going to cover are a few things. We're first going to look at what are the key principles of resume writing. So I'm going to give you 8 key principles that you should always have in your head when you're writing a resume. And I'm going to repeat these a lot in class or throughout this lecture, so you'll remember them. And then we're going to talk about generic versus targeted resumes, and we're going to talk about that and what is that exactly does that mean? How many versions of your resume do you need? Because it turns out you might need multiple versions of it, and we'll talk about what and why and how. We're also going to go into detail about ATS systems. So I think if you watched the first lecture series on the job market and such, you learned, I talked about ATS a little bit. We're going to go into more detail here. And then we're going to talk about keywords, because one of the things that you're going to have to do if you're going to apply for jobs online is you're going to need to match those keywords. So we'll explain what those are. And this segment is more overall arching framework, if you will. The later segments will go into exactly how to write it. But we have to have this foundational understanding first, so we know not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. First, let me go over some principles. So imagine it's like the burning bush, and I Moses and all that stuff, and I come back with the tablets. Okay, so here's what the stones say. Number 1, there are no rules, only preferences when it comes to resume writing. So resume writing is an art. There is an element of creativity that's going to be involved. And there's going to be a segment in this lecture series about design. And you want your resume to look good, and you want it to look nice, and you want it to be eye appealing. But resume writing is also a science, because there are some psychological principles that come into play in terms of how people interact with text and how people read material. And you have to understand that when you apply for a job, the recruiter is probably looking at dozens, if not hundreds, of resumes at a time. And so you really have to know how to stand out psychologically and understand the science behind resume writing and document display and all that. But with that said, there aren't any laws about resumes. It's not like if you don't have your work history in reverse chronological order, like it just won't work. It's just that when you're talking about something that is an art and a science, there's not going to be laws per se, but there's going to be best practices. And best practices are basically just, here's what we know from experience works. And ultimately, you want a resume that works. Nobody really writes a resume to put it like on the refrigerator and it's like a piece of art and you're looking at it every day and like, wow, look at my resume. No, you're using it to get a job. So very much so, everything I'm teaching you is based on pragmatism and what works. Secondly, resumes are advertisements, not obituaries. That is probably the number one thing when I look at resumes. That is the biggest issue people have. People write their resume like it's an obituary. Well, what's the difference? When people write an obituary, people just explain what happened. And they treat it like a social security document. So literally your resume is just job description. So here's what a server does. I take orders, I would deliver food, and then that's it. It's just an obituary. Advertisements are meant to sell. Resumes are very strategic documents. And so you're trying to sell something to people when you're trying to sell yourself as the best candidate to the reader. You can't just report information in a resume. You have to sell information in the resume. You have to put across ideas, and you have to do it efficiently and effectively. And so part of that goes into your design, part of that goes into your layout, part of that goes into what you emphasize in the document, and we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff in this series. So that leads to issue number 3, or principle number 3. Resumes are tactical documents. These aren't things that are going to look the same for everybody. You have to think about what works tactically in your circumstance. What will persuasively get the reader to respond? So you have to think in terms of space. You have to think in terms of what you emphasize in your resume. You have to think in terms of what does the employer want, and then where am I coming from, and how do I build that bridge to here's where I'm coming from and here is where I'm trying to go. So this isn't a social security document where you just mindlessly put work history and your education and then you're done. No, you have to think at a much higher level when you do resume writing. And it's a very tactical level. And I'm going to show you how strategy and tactics go into resume writing. So if you've never thought of a document like that before, if you've never thought about your resume like that before, well, you're going to be in for a treat. Now, one of the key tactical principles of resume writing is you are what you emphasize. Think of it this way. If I give a 5-minute speech, let's say I'm giving a speech and I have 5 minutes and I take up the 5 minutes. If for 4.5 minutes I talk about dogs, and then in the last 30 seconds I talk about toothpaste, what do you think if you ask somebody what was this speech about, what do you think most people are going to say? It's probably about dogs, because you spent 4.5 minutes talking about dogs. So I'm going to assume that this is a speech about dogs and toothpaste was just kind of like a little throwaway thing at the end. You have to think the same way when you think of resumes. The stuff that you put the most real estate to, so the concepts or your education or your experience, the things that you highlight in your resume, the things that you give the most real estate to are what employers are going to think you are. And so resumes are about space management and knowing what exactly do I want to see, what do I want the reader to see, and what do I want to stand out to them. And so depending on where you're applying, if you're applying for job A, you might emphasize certain aspects about your work history and emphasize those things. But if you apply for job B, you might emphasize a different set of aspects about yourself. So then the resumes look different because you are what you emphasize. 5th, everything is an argument. I get this question a lot. Well, it's usually something like, can I say this in the resume? Because technically when I worked here, I did blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sure. You can say anything you want. Everything is an argument. So if you think that education should be substitutable for experience, make that argument in the cover letter, in the resume. If you don't have the experience, but you have the education and you want to make an argument to the employer that your education substitutes the experience, so you want to argue the opposite, make the argument. So everything is an argument at the end of the day. If you can persuade people to believe that, your education substitutes for experience, make that argument and it works, great, then you got the job. Okay? So everything is an argument. 6, a shallow selection process requires firm attention to shallow details. Now, I know this hurts a lot of people's feelings, but the resume writing, when you apply for a job, and there's 50, 60, 70, 100, 200, there's going to be a lot of people applying for jobs in the post-pandemic era, so you're going to be going against a lot of people. It's going to be very shallow from the beginning. And so, you're in a pile of like 50 resumes or something, or in the database. And so it's a shallow process. So they're going to quickly look at your resume. They're going to speed read it. You hear different numbers. They'll say sometimes recruiters spend 20 seconds looking at your resume. Some say 30 seconds. It's some number of seconds. So it's very shallow when they look at it. And then after they do the shallow read and you make perhaps the yes pile or the maybe pile, then they'll do a close read later on. But if you have shallow mistakes in your resume and they see those shallow mistakes, then they're going to filter you out. So a shallow selection process requires firm attention to shallow details. So if your grammar is bad, that's going to be bad for you in the job search because you're going to get filtered out because of that shallow detail because it's a shallow selection process. So you got to have good grammar. If you have bad spacing, if you don't spell something right, I mean, there's like little things that can get you disqualified just because it's a shallow process, tons of people are applying, and employers can do that. Seventhly, tell us what we don't know. This is another thing that I always see in resumes. So you put server on your resume and you're like, work history, server. I deliver food to people. Okay, that's what a server does. No duh. What else? Well, I also take orders. Okay, I know that, right? What a server is. What else do we not know? Tell us something we don't know. Oh, when I was a server at this restaurant, I got employee of the month. Okay, that's something I wouldn't know looking at your title. Put that on your resume. So you're always thinking about not just you're not there to inform us, you're there to persuade us. And you have to tell us things that we wouldn't know intuitively just by looking at your job title. One of my other favorites, objective, to apply for the job at the company, to use my skill. We know that because you applied. Tell us something we don't know. Okay, so we'll talk about why we shouldn't use objective statements and use something else instead. So we'll go into that. And then eighth, the rhetoric of resumes lies in order and presentation. So you can never lie in a resume. So don't lie ever. Don't make up information. Don't make up facts. Don't make up statistics. Don't do any of that stuff. But you also have this option of emphasizing things and changing the order of things. So if you're really good in experience, like your experience is strong, your experience should come before your education, for example. But if you're like a new college graduate, you're probably going to have to sell your education quite a bit. So you would list your education first. So there's all these little, once again, tactical things that you have to think about in terms of what are my strongest points? What do I want to put first? Because that's what they're more likely going to read. And what do I want to put last to maybe de-emphasize that? So we'll talk about that, especially when it comes to work history as well. Now, there are 3 levels of resume. So I'm going to talk about the distinction in terms of levels being levels of targeting. First, you have your master resume. Your master resume will essentially be, and this can be a long document. This can be 5 pages, 6 pages, but your master resume is essentially all of your jobs that you've ever held your entire life, all of your accomplishments that you've had at all of your jobs your entire life. And it's basically just a master document that has everything you've ever done since you were born. Or at least, no, hopefully since you've started working, which is over the age of 14, labor laws. But you know what I mean. Okay, so all of the stuff that you have done, since you've started your work career. So this document is going to be long. It's going to be 6 pages, 5 pages, maybe short if you're only 18 and you've only been working since you were 16. Okay, I get it. But if you're like 20 years in, like you're going to have a lot of stuff. But your master resume just has everything that you've ever done. It makes you kind of a jack of all trades approach because it's just everything you've ever done. It doesn't have a clear job target. It doesn't say I'm trying to be X or I'm trying to be Y. It's just here's what I am. And you rarely ever use this in the job search. You never hand anyone your master resume because nobody would know what to do with it because it doesn't have a target and it doesn't have any strategy to it. It's just literally listing everything that you've ever done and then that's it. What you're probably going to do instead are these 2 other levels of resume. The second level is what I call the job generic resume. Now, this resume is going to be targeted towards general job area on a career path or a career path. So what you might do is you might make a resume for accounting, and it's going to be called your accounting resume. So you'll take your master resume and you'll build an accounting resume out of it. Your accounting resume is going to highlight all of your relevant accomplishments and work history relating to accounting. And then you might do some research on your field and learn about the common keywords in your area. So you might look at a couple of job postings and figure out what are the common keywords for those and put that in your resume. And the idea of the job generic resume is you're trying to look like a specialist. And a master resume, you're just like this jack of all trades. I don't know, I'll do anything. Job generic's like, okay, I want to be an accountant. So here is a resume for accountants. And you would use that in your reverse job search because it's still generic because it's not catered to a specific job posting, but it is catered to a field. So if you were to go on monster.com, I would use your job generic resume. And really, I used to just call it generic resume, but that sometimes confused people with master. So I call it job generic just to kind of make that a little clearer. I think it makes it clearer, but anyway. The third is your targeted resume. Now, this is your hyper-specific resume that's targeted to a specific job posting. So like your job generic resume, you're going to sell your relevant work history and you're going to sell relevant accomplishments to that particular job posting. And you're going to match keywords exactly. See, in the job generic resume, you might still have a lot of the keywords for the targeted job posting, but the targeted job posting might have some unique ones, or they might have some additional requirements that you have to mention in this particular resume. For example, a job posting might say, must be able to travel 25%, must have auto insurance, something like that. Your job generic resume probably won't need to say that, but let's say you're working at a company that's going to require travel. Your resume is going to need to address that to match that company's job posting. So you're going to have to make one targeted towards that. And what you're arguing is more or less a perfect fit approach. You're trying to say, see, in the job generic, you're just like, I'm an accountant. See, look at me, I'm an accountant, you know? But targeted, you're like, I am the perfect match for this position. I am your accounting executive one because I match everything directly. And you use it for the direct job search. So when you apply for jobs online, this is what you're actually using when you're applying directly to a posting. Let me visualize this a little bit so you can see this. So how many versions do I need? So first you have your master resume. You're only going to have one master resume, only one version of that because you only have one complete work history. Now, you're going to make something called a job one generic resume. So let's say it's an accounting resume. So you want to be an accountant. Cool. So you'll have a generic accounting resume that will be based off what you know about accounting and the keywords there. You're going to highlight all your work history from accounting, and you're going to highlight those accomplishments that relate to accounting and all that. And then let's say you apply for a job at a company. Okay, so then you're going to make a catered version of your generic resume. So if you just like look here, so you're going to make a catered version of your generic resume, and then you're going to make a company specific one. And then maybe you'll have another company you want to apply to. So you're going to take your generic resume and tailor it to job one company specific B. And then you just keep doing that. Every time you apply for a job at a company, you're going to take your job one generic, and then you're going to make a company specific one for that. So you, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you just end up having you'll have your generic resume, but then you'll have a folder and you'll just name each resume after each company. At least that's what I do. But let's say you have accounting as one thing, but you also are interested in sales. So then you're going to make from your master resume a sales resume or a job 2 generic. So then when you apply for sales jobs at wherever, you're going to make a job 2 company specific A sales job, and it's going to be catered to their keywords, their requirements, their idiosyncrasies, and so forth. So you'll have 3 layers of specificity of resume. You're going to have your master resume, which you'll hardly ever use, but you'll have your generic resume for reverse job search, and then you're going to have your specific resumes for each company. So here's just what it looks like if you were to give it, if it's like still too abstract, here's what it might look like. So you'll have generic accounting, and then your Smith & Jones resume, your Torchy's resume, your Langfield, and then same here. If it's project management, maybe you'll have a Spectrum resume and a WIBC resume. Now, you're probably thinking like, this is going to be a lot of work. Well, not necessarily, because once you make your generic resume, like 80% of the work is already done. And then all you're doing for the remaining 20% is just adjusting a few keywords or just adding a few. If the company requires something, you're adding in those few requirements. Or if there's something in the job posting, like if you have some accomplishment that you didn't really highlight here, but you think you should highlight here, then do so. And then also your cover letter. Your cover letter is going to be very catered to the job. So you're maybe talking, I mean, it just depends on how good your generic resume is. But let's say I want to apply for Smith & Jones. If my generic resume is really good, I did my keyword research, I know I have a good work history, my accomplishments stand out and stuff, it might only take 5-10 minutes to do an adjustment. So your Smith & Jones resume won't be all that different, but those small differences make a difference in terms of getting past the ATS, so it's still worth taking the time to do so. And then this is what I tell people. So remember I apply for 200 jobs and I just feel like I'm spinning my tires. Okay, because all they do is they just do their generic resume and they don't do this catering. That's how you end up in that situation. We want you to be quality, not quantity. Doing quantity job searching stinks. It's not fun. It hurts your self-esteem. I know I'm clapping because I want you all to remember. It hurts your self-esteem. Okay, so you don't want to do quantity job search. We call it spray and pray. Okay, don't do spray and pray. Be very strategic. And then you only have to apply for like 10 jobs at most, and you get 4 or 5 callbacks. That feels really good, okay? That feels really good. All right. Now, to get past the ATS, because this is the big part, because you're like, man, I have to make job-specific resumes. Okay, but you have to understand how ATS systems work. So what is an applicant tracking system? So these are all examples right here. You see Ceridian, Connexa, PeopleSoft, SAP. So an applicant tracking system is a database that tracks all applicants for a job. Now, it does several things for the HR person or the recruiter. It's going to rate your resume on keyword match, okay, and how well you actually catered to the position. But it's also a way for them to keep track of who they've called, how do we feel about them, write notes about candidates and so forth, track references. So it does a lot of things. But it can screen out applicants algorithmically, because if you have 200 applicants for one position, they're not going to read all 200 resumes. I guarantee you, no HR person, no recruiter reads 200 resumes. They're going to go to the applicant tracking system, and they're going to type in a few keywords, and if you don't have those keywords in there, you obviously didn't care, you did spray and pray, and you're just like, I'm just going to apply for everything, because why not? And they're just going to rule you out, and then you never even get looked at. So that's the thing for people who are long-term unemployed. A lot of these people don't even get looked at. They might be great applicants, but because they're not working towards the applicant tracking system, they're not even getting looked at. Now, we can talk about prevalence of ATS systems. Definitely mid-sized to large companies use these because they just have so many employees and so many people. Now, if you really are just scared of the ATS and like, I never want to do anything with it, okay, well, of course you can get a job through networking, referrals, and recruiters, all these other ways. But also, some small businesses don't. I mean, probably many. I don't have a number, but it seems as though small businesses don't work or don't use ATS systems as much because they're so small. So if you don't mind working in a small business, you might not have to worry about this. But otherwise, most companies, if any jobs online, there's going to be some kind of ATS system that's going to be associated with it, more than likely. So here's, as far as market share goes, this was the latest data I was able to find. But it appears that Taleo is the most common ATS. 54% of companies use that. But you might have heard of some of these before if you've ever applied for jobs online like BrassRing and JobVite and SAP. But Taleo seems to be the most common one that people use for ATS systems. Now, here's a screenshot of one ATS system. You can see when you apply for a job, it's not like somebody on the other end is just waiting for you to like, oh, resume, whoa, that kind of, no, your name just goes into a database, something like this. And then they'll click on your name and they'll be able to look at your resume and such. Now, every ATS is different. That's what makes it hard about teaching ATS systems because there's so many out there. So here's another one called Lever. And then you can see just there's 8 new applicants and then they use it to keep track of phone interviews and such. Here's where the job that they're applying for and some keywords associated with them. Even their education and previous work is here. So that's something else to think about. You can see the keywords right here that they're looking at. Now that you've seen the ATS, let's look at keywords, because that's one thing that's a key theme throughout ATS systems is being able to know what the keywords are so that way your resume will get past it. So keywords are basically searchable terms for the ATS and the recruiter. They're often essential for displaying match to the position. And the other thing is they have to be exactly worded as the job posting. So if in your resume, if you were to refer to yourself as a customer service representative, that's good and all. But if the job posting doesn't call it customer service, they call it client service, you're going to miss all those keywords because even though they're synonyms, ATS systems don't know synonyms. They're not at that level yet. So you then have to change your resume to match client service. Even though it's the same thing, from a keyword standpoint, they're very different because they're different words. So these are the kinds of things that you have to be paying attention to when you apply for a job. Even synonyms still have to be the same exact words that they use in the job posting, because these are the things that the ATS is looking for and what the recruiters are looking for. Now, there are 4 categories of keywords that you have to think about when you're looking for them. First, there are hard skill keywords, and these are probably the most essential to have in your resume. So these categories of keywords include job titles, professional skills, job-specific functions. KPIs are key performance indicators. You're going to hear me say that a lot when we talk about accomplishments. So they're the evidence that you're effective at whatever it is that you do. And technological skills. So certain software programs, hardware, if you're in IT, you got to have technology hard skills listed in your resume because that's essential for that job. But yes, hard skills are definitely number one thing you should be looking for, and you should be making sure you list in your resume to ensure you're getting past the ATS. But then you also got to make sure you have those soft skills too. Communication skills. So if they say must have good leadership skills, you better have leadership in your resume. If they're talking about personal attributes, we're looking for a self-starter. Try to work self-starter into your summary, or maybe mention it somewhere in one of your work experience sections. So that way you can get credit for those keywords as well. But then also education, degrees, majors, minors, credentials, licenses, trainings. So if you're applying for a job in graphic design, you better have the word graphic design as your major. Just don't put, associates, Austin. No, put your major. That's a key word, okay? And then make sure you have your credentials and licenses and trainings. And then that's probably where I'd want to mention coursework then, because if I can get the words Adobe Creative Suite multiple times in my resume, great, because that's going to give me a stronger match to the position. And then general information. So usually company names, if you can work the name of the company into your resume as like the job target, that's always smart. Product names, so if they require familiarity with certain products, like if they're a company that sells life jackets or something, let's say, and you mention life jackets in your resume, cool. Foreign languages are something that they might look for or might be a keyword. So if it says must be bilingual Spanish and English, you better have Spanish and English in there. Professional affiliations, they might want that. If they say you should be affiliated, you need to be certified by this association or be a member of that. And then city, state, and zip code. A lot of people put their full address on a resume. You don't need your full address. You just need city, state, and zip code. That's if they're going to look by area. They're not going to look by street. They're going to look by general metropolitan area. So city, state, and zip code should be on your resume. It's also important for the employer to know because they need to know if you need to relocate or not and if they have to give you a relocation package. All right. Then we should also be looking at identifying keywords in an actual posting. So here is a job, social media manager, and it's with Paladin Staffing. And you can see here when you look at a job posting, you can see that you always have the company overview here, and then you have the duties and responsibilities as well. And that's in the middle section. I'm trying to change to if PowerPoint would let me do that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so you have responsibilities here, and then you have the requirements. So usually it's company overview, responsibilities, and requirements. And then sometimes they'll have instructions to apply. Sometimes they'll also have benefits too. But okay, when you're actually looking for keywords, these are the 3 key sections you should be looking for. The company overview to kind of get those general job information keywords, responsibilities for job-specific hard skills, and then work experience requirements for education and also skills. So if we're looking at this job posting, how would we know what the keywords are? Now, you're never going to know 100%, okay? Because it depends on the recruiter. It depends on the ATS. So it's more like you're trying to predict. You're trying to anticipate what these possible keywords would be. And you should probably anticipate at least 15 to 30 keywords per position. So however you can cover all your bases, cover all your bases. So the first way you can try to find keywords is just by taking the highlighter. So what I did here was I just copy and pasted the job posting onto a Word doc and literally look for the 4 types of keywords. So hard skills, anything that relates to a technology, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, anything that's a skill or working with the product, I highlight those words. Strategic thought leadership, that's a huge buzzword now. Cross-functional teams, that's big. Okay, social media, you're going to want that. And so literally highlight almost every noun that's a skill or a product skill or some knowledge of a product. So then I'm going to say, okay, these are the words I want to make sure I have in my resume somewhere. That's method 1. And this method is free. You just copy and paste, use a highlighter. Method 2 is you can use a website called WordCounterNet. What you do is you copy and paste into the word counter, and then you see over here you have keyword density. And what you can do is once you put the whole job posting in there, you can look for words that appear multiple times. Now, you can go words that appear singularly or in twos, so social media would then become 2. And then whatever words appear frequently that have to do with skills or with the 4 categories, put those words in your resume. And because social media probably appears a lot in this job posting, you better have social media in your resume a lot if you're applying for this position. So WordCounter.net, it is free. You don't have to pay for anything. And it's a totally legit way to try to find keywords. The third method, you'll have to pay for this one, but it's called JobScan, jobscan.co. Now, I have an account with JobScan. The way it works is you upload the job posting and you upload your resume. And then what JobScan does is it gives you a percent match of your resume to the job posting based on their algorithm. So it's not going to always be 100%, but it'll tell you like on your resume, you don't have the word brand because you can see it's X'd out, but the job description has it 4 times. You don't have strategy, but the job description has it 3 times. And so this can help guide you in terms of how to update your resume and how to cater it to the specific job posting so you can make sure you can have a better match. 35% is really bad. Okay, you don't want to be 35% match for a job because ATS system, hundreds of people applying, you don't want to be in that position. So you want to really make sure you get these keywords in here. And so even JobScan tries to predict what they think the skills will be, and that's really nice. Now you have to, I think you get 5 free scans at jobscan.co, but then after that you have to pay a membership fee. It's a monthly membership. But when you're on the job, like this is what I use. Like when I was doing professional resume writing, this was my go-to. It was really helpful, really useful. And it was a way to show clients too that, that this is really catered to the position, and it works. It works a lot. Now, you can then see the problem. Like this is the challenge of resume writing. You have to somehow make the resume appealing to a human, but also to a computer at the same time. And so resume writing is tightrope walking here. You have to really walk a fine line here because humans want concise writing. We want something brief that's really easy to read and not a lot of writing because people don't like to read, even though it's fun. But the computer needs something that's keyword dense. The computer needs to make sure that you're hitting all the keywords, that you get the phrases in right. And so there's a bit of a tension there because you want to be brief and to the point, but you got to also make sure you get your keywords in. Humans like eye-catching design. Humans like something that's pretty to look at and easy to skim and nice spacing and all that stuff. But the computer wants a simple format because you have to make sure your design is ATS friendly. And we're going to talk about ATS friendly design later in the series. And then a human reads the resume, and then there's 2 kinds of reading that humans do. They do the speed read first, and if you pass the speed read, and the speed read is the 20-second eye scan, then you get the close read, and that'll either happen immediately or shortly thereafter after you make the yes or maybe pile. But a computer doesn't read resumes, it scans resumes. Like it just scans for the words, it doesn't think about what you wrote. It just says, I see words, put them here, okay? So there's tension here between the human and the computer. So you have to know how to appeal to both when you're applying for jobs online. Some people do a really good job appealing to the human with these beautiful designed resumes that are nice, but then they're not ATS friendly. So then they don't get past the computer. Human never looks at it in the first place. Some people really good about computer, but then the human looks at it and it looks like trash. Okay, so then they don't read it because it looks terrible. So you have to make both parties happy here. You have to have the middle ground. Luckily, I know how to teach the middle ground, so you're in luck. In this segment then, we looked at a couple things. We looked at what are the key principles of resume writing. Remember those 8 principles. I'm going to be repeating them a lot, and you're just going to have to know them. And then we looked at generic versus targeted resumes and why it's important to have a targeted resume to a job. We looked at how many versions you need. So remember, it's going to depend on the job and then job specific. We looked at what an ATS system is and how and what keywords are and how to find them. So once you have these things figured out, then you'll know how to start building your resume, and then you'll have greater success. So join me in part 2, where before we get into resumes, we got to make sure we have a clear message, because a lot of times resumes lack messaging, and we'll figure out how to get your messaging across in part 2, selling points. See you there.